Well, of course, the other thing about the EU, I think, is Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of Britain today, or was it yesterday? I'm not sure now. I've lost time in this bubble. And the French, who are pressing for this bigger reductions. The European Union patched together an agreement with some of the countries that certainly didn't want to join in reductions, such as Poland. And now it looks as though it's slightly unraveling. They're playing a competitive game among themselves as to who's going to push them on or hold back. And that's very significant here because the negotiations are essentially conducted in blocks. So when you finally get down to real negotiations, it's not every country talking. It's obviously the EU, the US is on its own, the developing countries, China is a bit special, and now the small island states. So if you get dissension within a bloc like the European Union, it can really slow down negotiations or make them almost impossible. Because what happens is you get an argy-bargy in the secret negotiations, and then the EU says, well, we'll have to go and think about this, and then they have to go and have their own negotiations about what they're going to bring back to the conference. So it really slows everything down and makes it very difficult. So it looks good to have individual countries making these proposals, but it's a little destabilizing for the talks, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's a very, very complicated process. I think it's way beyond what most people out there realize it can be. There are tens and tens of thousands of people here to watch it, but the number of negotiators is not a small number.
It's not a small number. Of course, the US is a bit fortunate. They're not in a block with anyone. They're a block of one, so that helps. So, yes, I haven't picked up much other news today. It was really quiet until this news broke of the Danish proposal. And then a little ripples of excitement, I think, from the British and French intervention. I don't know if you've picked up anything else. Well, we both haven't been around much. We've been sitting here most of the time. But and there's nothing. Can you make one last check on the One Climate, if anyone's, before we close this little session, if anyone's made any comments? I think tomorrow there will be a series of press conferences as developing countries respond to this Danish proposal. The Danes, as I said, are trying to play it down, but even if they backtrack and say, no, this was just one of many documents, it's going to sour the talks, I think, and they'll have to do quite a lot of bridge building to get back on this. And, of course, they're a member of the EU too, so, again, that's another little problem for the EU. So nothing much... maybe something.
There was a question for our previous guest talking about forests, and since Danny is quite knowledgeable about forests himself, I'll just throw it out there. He said it's actually about forests and the negotiating process. He says saving forests has been called the least contentious issues in UN climate talks. Is this right?
Well, I would say it's one of the most contentious issues, and I think it's one of the most contentious issues precisely for this reason, that it's seen as not contentious. Who can oppose stopping deforestation? It's like, who's against healthy babies? You know, we all want trees. It's great. The trouble is, in the rush to find a solution that would affect 17% of emissions potentially, I think they're just stampeding very fast down a path and forgetting that it's a very complex issue, that the people who live in the forest, the people who depend on the forest, could get swept aside here. And the language so far, not agreed, but on the negotiating table, would enable logging companies to go in and clear forests and then plant plantations, for instance, which are not good for biodiversity, they're not good for forest people, they're very bad for indigenous people. So under the guise of protecting forests, it may do the opposite. It could speed it up. And then the billions of dollars that will come in will be frighteningly dangerous for some governments. I mean, people are going to rush to seize that money, and heaven knows what they'll do with it. So it's a very contentious issue, and I think the NGOs are very concerned about it, and as are some governments. So, and no, I don't think it is uncontentious.
Yeah, I lived in Madagascar for a little while, and it's a very interesting situation with the forest there. It's, trying to manage a forest is an extraordinarily complicated process. And it's very interesting that a lot of the non-governmental organizations like WWF are working with local people, local villages to train them on how to manage the forest, because it's their livelihood and it's their space that they've lived with their entire lives. And so it doesn't really make sense for some outsider to come in and manage that forest for them. It makes a lot more sense to have an organization, or to have local people understanding and trained how to manage a forest well, so that it stays around and it's there providing the things they need over the decades, in addition to taking the carbon out of the atmosphere and doing the things that the whole rest of the world needs as well. So it's quite a complicated issue. I just wanted to make one more point. Someone asked on the comment box here, will the subject of endangered species due to climate change be covered? And it certainly will, I'm sure, many times over the course of the next 2 weeks.